usually when we look at history, there's this expectation of precision.
Right. Oh, yeah, a desire for order.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, it's comforting. You look at a timeline, the dates line up perfectly, the map shows a clear border, and the historical X-ray machine just gives you this clean, easy picture.
Right, the good guys, the bad guys, the exact dates.
Yeah. But then you step into the world of ancient warfare, specifically, the legacy of one of the most famous generals to ever live, and that X-ray machine just shatters.
It completely breaks down.
We find ourselves looking at a massive historical blind spot. I mean, we are dealing with a man whose military tactics are enthusiastically studied by Western military academies today. But his North African origins are simultaneously just structurally obscured.
It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters, and that tension is really the core of the research dossier we are pulling from today for this deep dive.
Yeah.
The premise here is fascinating because it forces us to grapple with an epistemic void. Like, the victors literally burned the libraries.
Which is wild to think about.
Yeah, it is. The primary ancient accounts we rely on, chiefly the Greek historian Polybius, who's writing in the mid-2nd century BCE, and the Roman historian Livy, they are fundamentally the perspectives of the people trying to kill him.
Right. It's like reading a biography written entirely by your worst enemies.
Exactly. And this dossier attempts to synthesize those hostile accounts with modern military scholarship from academics like Dexter Hoyos and Richard Miles. Plus, it brings in the often overlooked findings of modern Tunisian archaeology.
Which is so crucial. So the mission of this deep dive today is twofold. First, we are going to, tear down the mechanics of his legendary campaigns during the Second Punic War, right? From 218 to 201 BCE.
The big one.
The huge one. We're going to look at his maneuvers not just as history, but as a literal case study for modern military officers. I'm talking the impossible logistics, the psychological manipulation, the stuff that operations research courses at West Point and Sandhurst are literally built on.
Yeah, the foundational texts of modern warfare.
Exactly. And second, we are going to unpack that central thesis from the dossier. How institutional history has basically managed to cleanly sever the tactical genius from the African context that produced him.
It's a huge disconnect.
It really is. We are talking about Hannibal Barca. And to understand how he fought, we really have to start by understanding the geopolitical reality he was born into. We have to talk about Carthage.
Yeah, we have to start with Carthage. Because for a lot of people, the word Carthage conjures up something almost mythical.
Like a storybook place.
Right, or just some vague Mediterranean trading post that occasionally annoyed Rome. But the reality is that by the 3rd century BCE, Carthage was a massive North African maritime titan.
It was a superpower.
A total superpower. Founded around 814 BCE on the coast of modern Tunisia, it had grown into this sprawling metropolis. We are looking at a population estimated at around 700,000 people.
Wow. In the ancient world, that is staggering.
It's massive, and they didn't just have ships. They had a commercial network that completely monopolized trade from the Levant all the way out to the tin mines of Cornwall in Britain.
They were everywhere.
Everywhere. They controlled vast colonies across Iberia, Sardinia, and Sicily.
So if you are the Roman Republic, right, sitting across the Mediterranean, Carthage is the superpower next door that is actively blocking your expansion.
Exactly. They are the ceiling to Rome's ambition.
And the tension had already boiled over once. The First Punic War, which ended in 241 BCE, was just this 23-year meat grinder.
A brutal, brutal conflict.
Yeah, and it left Carthage stripped of Sicily and burdened with these crippling financial indemnities to Rome, basically war reparations.
Huge reparations, and that defeat, that humiliation, it fundamentally shaped the psychology of Hannibal's father.
Hamilcar Barca.
Yes, Hamilcar Barca. Because Hamilcar didn't just accept the loss. He didn't just pay the fine and move on. He pivoted entirely.
Right. He essentially goes rogue, doesn't he?
He pretty much creates a breakaway military state. Hamilcar takes his forces to the Iberian Peninsula, modern-day Spain, and spends decades rebuilding Carthaginian power completely outside the immediate view of the conservative politicians back in Carthage.
Who probably just wanted to keep their heads down and appease Rome.
Exactly. The mercantile elite in Carthage wanted peace for business. Hamilcar wanted revenge. So he exploits the massive silver mines of Cartagena to fund an entirely new military apparatus.
That's brilliant. He finds his own funding.
He does. And this is a critical departure from Roman methods. Rome uses citizen soldiers. Hamilcar builds a highly professional, multi-ethnic mercenary army.
So who are we talking about? Who's in this army?
He integrates Celt-Iberian heavy infantry, Gallic swordsmen, and crucially, Numidian light cavalry from North Africa. It is this diverse coalition force, and it's held together by two things: silver and Hamilcar's sheer personal charisma.
And Hannibal is raised right in the center of that military camp. I mean, he's born in Carthage in 2047 BCE, but by the time he is 9 years old, he's out in Iberia watching his father forge this weapon.
He grows up in the tent, basically.
Right, and this brings us to that legendary story from Polybius. The account claims that before leaving for Iberia, Hamilcar takes 9-year-old Hannibal to the temple of Baal, holds his hand over the sacrificial fire, and makes him swear a blood oath to never be a friend to Rome.
A famous oath.
Yeah. But I have to ask you, and I want to push back on this a bit, is this historical fact? Or is Polybius just writing the ancient equivalent of a supervillain origin story to justify, like, Roman paranoia?
That's the perfect question, really, because Polybius is writing more than 70 years after the fact.
Right.
And he's writing for a Roman audience, an audience that really needs a rationalization for why this one man terrorized their grandparents so thoroughly.
They need him to be a monster from birth.
Exactly. So the verbatim dialogue at the altar, that is almost certainly a conventional literary device. Ancient historians use that all the time to heighten the narrative stakes.
There's a bit of dramatic flair.
A lot of dramatic flair. However, and this is key, the strategic posture of the Barcid dynasty, Hannibal's family, was aggressively anti-Roman.
They hated Rome.
Deeply. The Barcids viewed the peace of 241 BCE as a temporary truce, not a permanent settlement.
Just pause to reload.
Exactly. So whether a literal blood oath was sworn over a fire or not, Hannibal was completely steeped in an intergenerational conflict. His entire education, his military training, his diplomatic worldview, it was all built on the premise that a second existential war with Rome was inevitable.
He inherits that inevitability, and he officially gets the reins in 221 BCE. His brother-in-law, Hasdrubal the Fair, is assassinated, and the army just immediately acclaims Hannibal as commander.
They don't even wait for Carthage to approve it.
Right. He's in his mid-20s, and he is suddenly holding the leash to the most lethal military machine in the Western Mediterranean.
And he doesn't wait long to use it.
No, he doesn't. By 219 BCE, he lays siege to Saguntum, which is a city on the Iberian coast that happened to have a treaty with Rome. He captures it, Rome issues an ultimatum, Carthage refuses to back down this time, and boom, the Second Punic War officially begins.
And this is where the expectations of war completely clash. Rome expects a conventional war.
Right, they think they know how this is going to play out.
They assume they hold the initiative, they expect to mobilize their massive fleets, blockade the sea lanes, and perhaps launch a slow, grinding invasion of Iberia or maybe eventually North Africa.
They expect to fight on their terms.
Exactly. But Hannibal strips that initiative away immediately by doing the absolute unthinkable.
Yeah, he flips the board.
He recognizes that Carthage cannot win a war of naval attrition against Rome's industrial shipbuilding capacity. The Romans could just pump out ships endlessly.
So he decides to ignore the sea entirely.
He does. He realizes the only way to win is to fracture the Roman alliance system on the Italian peninsula itself. He decides to march his army over land,
which initiates the Alpine crossing of 218 BCE. Which is, frankly, widely considered one of the most audacious logistical operations in human history.
It's legendary for a reason.
He sets out from Iberia with an estimated 50,000 infantry, 9,000 cavalry, and crucially, famously, 37 war elephants.
The elephants always get the headlines.
They really do. Let's break down the mechanics of this, though, because this is where modern military pedagogy really sinks its teeth into the narrative.
Oh, absolutely.
You hear elephants in the Alps, and it sounds like cinematic fantasy, like Lord of the Rings. But operations research and supply chain officers today study this specific march to understand the limits of expeditionary logistics.
Because the math is terrifying.
It is. How do you actually move and feed 60,000 humans and thousands of animals across the Pyrenees, over the massive Rhone River, and up into the freezing hostile altitudes of the Alps in late autumn? Entirely without a GPS, without radios, or a formal pre-positioned supply chain.
You do it through an absolute mastery of distributed cellular logistics.
Cellular logistics. What does that mean in an ancient context?
Well, think about modern armies. They rely on a linear tail. A vulnerable, long line of trucks moving fuel and food from a safe base up to the front lines.
Right, the supply line.
Exactly. Hannibal didn't have a tail. He couldn't. So he broke his light cavalry and foraging units into autonomous cells. These cells spread out miles ahead and to the flanks of the main column, and they systematically stripped the surrounding countryside of caloric resources.
So they are constantly moving, constantly eating whatever they find.
Like a swarm. He also utilized aggressive diplomacy, bribing or, frankly, intimidating Gallic tribes along the route to secure their grain stores.
But even with brilliant foraging, the physical reality of moving an army of that size through a mountain pass is just a nightmare of friction.
Friction is the perfect word for it.
I mean, you have tens of thousands of men marching in a column that stretches for miles. The men at the front might be walking on packed dirt, but by the time the center and the rear guard pass through that same spot, right, the ground is churned into an impassable, freezing mud pit. And then there are the local mountain tribes, like the Allobroches, rolling boulders down into the gorges, attacking the vulnerable baggage train. The attrition rate was just catastrophic.
The human and animal toll was horrific. A significant portion of the infantry succumbed to hypothermia, starvation, or ambush. And almost all of those famous elephants eventually perished, either in the mountains or shortly after from exposure.
They just weren't built for the snow.
Not at all. Now, the dossier points out an interesting academic debate here. Historians and geologists still passionately argue over the exact route he took.
Oh, right. Like, which pass did he actually use?
Yeah, was it the Col de Clapier, the Col de la Traversette, or another pass? People study rock formations and ancient pollen trying to prove it.
But does it really matter from a military perspective?
Not really. Modern military theorists focus less on the exact GPS coordinates and more on the concept of strategic shock.
The surprise factor.
Exactly. When Hannibal emerged into the Po Valley in northern Italy with his surviving, emaciated force, he completely paralyzed the Roman strategic apparatus.
Right. The monster they thought was neatly contained in Iberia had just materialized literally behind their mountain defenses.
They were completely caught off guard.
But surviving the Alps forces Hannibal into a really desperate corner, right? He is deep in enemy territory. His men are starving, exhausted, and they're vastly outnumbered. He has absolutely no home base.
None. He is floating in hostile territory.
This means he cannot afford to play defense. He has to steal a victory immediately, not just to survive, but to convince the local Gallic tribes in northern Italy to actually join his coalition.
He needs a win to prove he's a viable alternative to Rome.
Exactly. And this desperation leads directly to the Battle of the Trebia in December 218 BCE, which is just a masterclass in psychological profiling.
It really is. To understand Trebia, you really have to look at the flaw in the Roman command structure at the time.
The two consuls system.
Yes. The Roman Republic was deeply suspicious of giving any one man too much power. If you look together, commanding the same army, they literally alternated command every single day.
Which sounds insane from a modern military perspective.
It's a recipe for disaster. Hannibal completely understood the political friction this created. At Trebia, he is facing the consul Sempronius Longus.
And Hannibal knows exactly who he's dealing with.
He does. He knows from his scouts and informants that Sempronius is arrogant, he's aggressive, and he is absolutely desperate for a glorious victory before his political term expires at the end of the year.
He wants his name in the history books.
Exactly. So Hannibal decides to hack that psychology.
Let's set the scene, because this is incredible. It is a freezing December morning. Sleet is falling. The swollen, icy Trebia River separates the two army camps.
Miserable conditions.
Totally miserable. Before dawn, Hannibal sends his elite Numidian light cavalry across the river right up to the edge of the Roman camp. And they just start throwing javelins at the guards, screaming insults, deliberately provoking the Romans.
And Sempronius Longus takes the bait completely.
Hook, line, and sinker. He orders his entire army out of their tents before they've even had breakfast to chase these skirmishers back across the river.
And the physiological degradation of the Roman infantry here is the key mechanism of the battle. Sempronius forces roughly 40,000 men to wade chest-deep through a freezing, swollen river.
Oh, it's brutal.
By the time they form their battle lines on Hannibal's side of the bank, they are already suffering from early-stage hypothermia.
They're shivering, their muscles are cramping.
They literally cannot grip their weapons properly, and they are calorically depleted because they haven't eaten.
Whereas Hannibal, on the other hand...
Hannibal had ordered his men to sleep in. He had them eat a massive hot breakfast and then cover their bodies in oil around roaring campfires to insulate themselves against the cold.
That is just brilliant. The Romans are essentially marching into a meat grinder of their own making.
A frozen meat grinder.
But Hannibal doesn't just rely on their exhaustion. The night before, he had hidden a detachment of 2,000 elite troops, commanded by his brother Mago, in a sunken watercourse hidden by high brush.
Right off to the side of the battlefield.
Yeah. So once the freezing Roman infantry commits to the frontal assault and pushes forward, Mago's detachment springs from the ravine and hits the Romans directly in the rear.
While the Carthaginian cavalry sweeps around the flanks.
It is a complete encirclement. Roughly 20,000 Roman soldiers are slaughtered that day. Half of a consular army annihilated because Hannibal understood that pride and cold weather are a lethal combination.
And the thing is, he scales this psychological manipulation even further just 6 months later, in June 217 BCE, at the Battle of Lake Trasimene.
Trasimene. This one is almost scary.
If Trebia was an exploitation of individual psychology, Trasimene is an exploitation of the Roman military's systemic reliance on rigid command and control.
Okay, unpack that. How did he exploit their system?
Well, he's facing a new consul now, a guy named Flaminius, who is recklessly pursuing him down the Italian peninsula. Hannibal finds this geographical bottleneck, a very narrow, foggy road squeezed between the steep hills of Cortona on one side and the shores of Lake Trasimene on the other.
A literal choke point.
Yes. Hannibal marches his army through this pass, and Flaminius charges right in after him, assuming he is simply chasing a retreating enemy.
But he's not retreating.
No. Hannibal has positioned his entire army up on the wooded slopes above the road. They are completely invisible in the dense morning fog.
So the Romans are just marching in a long, thin column right into a kill zone.
Exactly. And the mechanism of the ambush relies on hacking the Roman communication network.
Which was based on sight and sound, right?
Right. Roman legions operated on complex auditory and visual signals, the raising of standards, the blowing of specific trumpet calls, that sort of thing.
So when the trap is sprung,
when the trap is sprung and the Carthaginians charge down the hillsides out of the fog, the Roman column is stretched out over miles. The fog completely blinds their visual cues. They can't see the flags.
And the sound.
The sudden, deafening roar of tens of thousands of men screaming in ambush completely drowns out the auditory signals. The Roman command structure instantly disintegrates into isolated pockets of panicked men.
They have no idea what's happening. It's not a battle. It's an execution.
Truly.
The Romans cannot form their defensive squares. They're pushed laterally into the lake, drowning under the weight of their own armor, or they're just cut down on the muddy shore. The entire army of 30,000 men is wiped out, and Flaminius himself is killed.
It was an unprecedented disaster for Rome.
You know, it reminds me, the sheer kinetic energy of the Roman legion was completely neutralized because Hannibal forced them to fight in a space that robbed them of their structure.
That's a great way to put it.
It's like he treats the Roman military machine like a battering ram that has immense forward momentum but absolutely zero lateral agility. He never stands directly in front of the battering ram. He constantly steps to the side and lets it crash into a wall, or in this case, a lake.
He uses their own weight against them, which sets the stage perfectly for what happens on August 2nd, 216 BCE. Cannae. Because the trauma of Trebia and Trasimene pushed the Roman Republic to the absolute brink of collapse, they realized that standard consular armies were just not enough, so they mobilized the largest single force Rome had ever fielded up to that point.
How big are we talking?
Estimates vary, but we are looking at roughly 80,000 to 85,000 men.
That is massive for antiquity.
Unbelievable scale. They march out to a dusty plain in southern Italy called Cannae, intent on crushing Hannibal's force at about 50,000 through sheer, overwhelming mass.
The Battle of Cannae. This is the blueprint. This is the maneuver that military academies from the École de Guerre in France to the U.S. Marine Corps University teaches as the Platonic ideal of tactical perfection, the double-envelopment.
The holy grail of maneuvers.
Let's break down exactly how this trap worked, because on paper, it completely defies conventional military logic.
It really does.
The Romans decide to pack their heavy infantry incredibly tight in the center. They want to maximize that battering ram effect we talked about. They figure if they punch straight through the Carthaginian center, they break the army in half and win the day.
And Hannibal anticipates this exact doctrine. He knows they're going to try and punch through the middle. So he deploys his army in a convex crescent formation, bulging outward toward the Roman lines.
Had a bow pointing at them.
Yes. But the genius lies in his troop placement. He places his Celt, Iberian, and Gallic infantry, the troops the Romans considered weaker and less disciplined, in the very center of the bulge, directly in the path of the heaviest Roman assault.
Which sounds crazy.
Right. And he places his most disciplined, veteran African heavy infantry on the extreme outer edges of the infantry line, arrayed in deep columns.
Right, so to a conventional commander, putting your least reliable troops at the point of maximum impact looks like suicide.
It looks like a mistake.
But the massive Roman infantry block collides with the Carthaginian center. And just as expected, the center begins to yield. But they don't break and run.
They engage in a controlled fighting retreat.
Step by step, they back up. And the Romans, feeling the resistance giving way, become blood-drunk. They push forward aggressively, unconsciously compressing their own lines tighter and tighter as they funnel into the retreating center. The convex crescent slowly inverts, becoming a concave pocket.
And the physical realities of this compression are just terrifying. As the Romans push deeper into the pocket, they are packed so tightly together that the men in the center literally cannot even raise their weapons.
They're jammed shoulder to shoulder.
Worse, they are suffering from hypoxia in the crushing dust kicked up by the Volturnus wind. They can't breathe. And once the Roman battering ram is fully committed and physically exhausted, Hannibal triggers the jaws of the trap.
Here it comes.
Those veteran African infantry columns on the extreme left and right flanks, the ones that haven't even fought yet, they simply pivot inward, driving into the exposed sides of the Roman formation.
Because the battering ram has no lateral agility. They cannot turn to fight the flanks.
Exactly. And simultaneously, Hannibal's heavy cavalry, having already shattered the Roman cavalry on the wings earlier in the battle, sweeps all the way around the battlefield and slams into the rear of the Roman infantry.
The door closes.
The encirclement is total. It is a ring of steel closing in on 80,000 men.
The scale of the violence is hard to comprehend. Polybius records that over 50,000 Romans died that afternoon.
Yeah, modern historians often debate the exact figures, suggesting ancient sources might inflate numbers for dramatic effect, but even conservative estimates place the death toll in the tens of thousands.
To put this in perspective for you listening, Rome lost a larger percentage of its fighting-age male population in a single day at Cannae than any modern nation lost in a single battle during the First World War.
That is a staggering statistic.
It was an industrial-scale slaughter carried out entirely by hand, with swords and spears. It wasn't bombs. It was physical, close-quarters exhaustion.
And its legacy in military doctrine is absolute. I mean, when you look at Alfred von Schlieffen designing the German invasion of France in 1914, he explicitly titled his strategic theory a Cannae.
Really? He named it that?
He did. He wanted to replicate that exact double envelopment on a continental scale against the French army.
But this brings up a massive historical paradox, and it's a point I really want to push back on, or at least explore.
Sure.
If Cannae is the ultimate tactical victory, if it is the holy grail of warfare, why didn't the war end on August 3rd?
The million-dollar question.
Right. Hannibal annihilated the Roman army. He shattered their political leadership. But Rome didn't surrender. Our modern military academies may be too obsessed with the bloody, decisive battle, while missing the fundamental reality of how wars are actually won.
That is the essential contradiction of Hannibal's campaign, and it's exactly why senior strategists study his failures as intensely as his victories.
Because he won the battles but lost the war.
Precisely. He achieves absolute tactical supremacy, but he is trapped in a strategic nightmare. After Cannae, Hannibal remains in Italy for another 13 years.
13 years. Just wandering around.
He marches up and down the peninsula, devastating the countryside, but he lacks the siege equipment to actually breach the walls of Rome itself. And crucially, his diplomatic strategy fails.
He expected the Italian city-states to flip.
Yes, he expected them to rebel against Rome after Cannae, to see that Rome was weak. But the core of the Roman alliance system remained stubbornly loyal.
And Rome, despite the trauma, fundamentally adapts. They realize they cannot beat him in a contest of kinetic maneuvering on an open field. So they change the rules of the game entirely, under the leadership of a dictator named Quintus Fabius Maximus.
Fabius the Delayer.
Yeah, Fabius institutes a doctrine of relentless attrition.
It becomes known as the Fabian strategy, and it is the absolute bane of tactical genius. Fabius realizes that Hannibal's center of gravity isn't just his troops, it's his momentum and it's his logistics.
So Fabius issues a standing order. No Roman army is to engage Hannibal in a pitched, open-field battle. ever.
They just refuse to play his game.
Exactly. Instead, Roman forces just shadow his movements from the high ground. They burn the crops in front of him, they ambush his foraging parties, and they constantly threaten his vulnerable supply lines.
It requires immense political discipline. I mean, the Roman populace hated it. They called Fabius the delayer and accused him of cowardice.
It's not glorious.
Not at all, but it worked. They understood that if you let a fire burn without giving it new fuel, it will eventually exhaust itself. Hannibal is forced to spend more energy securing basic caloric resources for his men than projecting actual political power.
He's just trying to feed his army.
Every single day.
Yeah.
And the final nail in his Italian campaign comes in 207 BCE. His brother, Hasdrubal Barca, attempts to replicate the Alpine crossing to bring a massive relief army from Iberia.
Reinforcements are finally coming.
But this time, Rome intercepts the communication.
Oh, it's devastating.
They catch Hasdrubal at the Battle of the Manoeuvre in northern Italy. The Roman legions crush the reinforcement army, and Hasdrubal is killed.
And the way Hannibal finds out.
Yeah, it's incredibly grim. Hasdrubal's severed head is literally thrown into Hannibal's camp by Roman riders.
Just a horrific psychological blow.
That gruesome moment signifies the absolute isolation of Hannibal in southern Italy. He is totally contained.
And while Hannibal is bleeding out logistically in Italy, a new Roman commander emerges, who essentially steals the Carthaginian playbook. Scipio Africanus. He is the survivor of Cannae. He was there. He studied how Hannibal dismantled the Roman legions, and he implements sweeping reforms. But more importantly, he shifts the entire strategic theater.
He stops fighting the symptom and goes for the disease.
Right. Scipio doesn't try to fight Hannibal in Italy. He takes a Roman army to Iberia, systematically dismantling the Barcid power base and cutting off their wealth, their silver. Then, in 204 BCE, Scipio does the unthinkable. He invades North Africa.
He brings the war directly to the gates of Carthage.
The Carthaginian Senate panics. In 203 BCE, they are forced to issue a recall order. Hannibal, after 15 undefeated years ravaging the Italian peninsula, is forced to board ships and abandon his campaign to defend a homeland he hasn't seen since he was a child.
It's a tragic irony. He never lost a battle in Italy, but he has to leave and defeat.
Which culminates in the Battle of Zama in October 202 BCE, the final showdown, Hannibal versus Scipio. But the tactical geometry of the battlefield has fundamentally changed, hasn't it?
Completely. Scipio has reformed the Roman mandibles to be more flexible so they can actually maneuver laterally now. But the true deciding factor is diplomatic.
Cavalry.
Yes. For decades, the Numidian light cavalry had been the secret engine of Hannibal's flanking maneuvers. But at Zama, the Numidian king, Massinissa, defects to Rome.
That is a massive shift in power.
It completely inverts the tactical reality. At Zama, Hannibal finally faces a Roman army that possesses cavalry superiority.
So what happens?
When the infantry lines clash, Hannibal's veterans fight fiercely. It's a brutal slog. But the Numidian cavalry, now fighting for Scipio, drives the Carthaginian horsemen off the field, wheels around, and strikes Hannibal's infantry in the rear.
They pull a Cannae on him.
Hannibal suffers his own Cannae, the Carthaginian army is destroyed, and the Second Punic War is over.
The peace terms are designed to permanently castrate Carthage as a military power. They are forced to surrender their war elephants, burn their fleet down to just 10 patrol ships, and pay a crushing indemnity of 10,000 talents over 50 years.
Basically an impossible debt.
To give you a sense of scale, a single talent was roughly the weight of a man in silver. It was an astronomical sum designed to bankrupt the city. But the fascinating postscript to this, which the dossier really highlights, is that Hannibal doesn't just fade into history after the defeat, he transitions into civilian leadership.
This is a phase of his life that rarely gets talked about. From 196 to 193 BCE, he serves as suffet, which is the highest elected civil magistrate in Carthage, like a consul or a prime minister.
And how does he do?
He applies the same ruthless efficiency to governance that he applied to logistics. He dismantles the corrupt oligarchic systems that have been holding Carthage back. He restructures the tax code, and he revitalizes the agricultural sector.
He rebuilds the economy.
He is so successful that Carthage actually begins paying off the Roman indemnity ahead of schedule without even having to impose new taxes on the working class.
Which, ironically, is exactly what gets him exiled.
Rome couldn't stand it.
Right. Rome watches Carthage rebounding economically under Hannibal's leadership, and their paranoia just reignites. They demand his surrender. So, to spare the city another war, Hannibal flees into a life of permanent exile.
A man without a country.
He spends his final years bouncing between the courts of the Seleucid Empire and Bithynia, in modern-day Turkey, serving as a naval commander and a military advisor, constantly trying to forge new anti-Roman coalitions.
Still fighting the ghost of Rome.
Always. Finally, around 183 BCE, a Roman hit squad surrounds his villa in Bithynia. Rather than be paraded through the streets of Rome in chains, he takes a lethal dose of poison.
It is a profound, tragic end to a man whose geopolitical vision defined an era. But this brings us to the second deeply provocative mission of the dossier we are examining today.
The legacy.
Yes. The physical death of Hannibal was only the first step. The dossier argues that what happened next, over the following 2 millennia, was a systematic process of structural obfuscation. And to understand that, we have to look at the Third Punic War, specifically the year 146 BCE.
Decades after Hannibal's suicide, Rome returns to North Africa. They besiege Carthage, and under the command of Scipio Aemilianus, the adoptive grandson of Scipio Africanus, they don't just defeat the city, they erase it.
They wipe it from the map.
They slaughter or enslave the remaining population, they level the architecture, and most devastatingly, they burn the archives. They incinerate the Punic-language records, the military manuals, the civil histories.
The dossier frames this as an act of deliberate epistemicide, the intentional destruction of a civilization's knowledge system.
Epistemicide, that's a heavy word.
It is, but it's accurate. Because those records burned, every single surviving account of Hannibal's life is mediated through the language and the biases of his conquerors. We do not have Hannibal's memoirs. We do not have the Carthaginian after-action reports from Cannae. His own voice is a void.
And the dossier argues that this epistemic void allows for a modern pedagogical sleight of hand. The thesis here is incredibly compelling. When you walk into a Western military academy today, Hannibal is universally lauded. His tactics are dissected with pure reverence.
But there's a catch.
A huge catch.
Yeah.
He is routinely framed as Phoenician or Carthaginian in a way that the dossier argues serves as a geographical euphemism. It subtly divorces him from the African continent. It allows military syllabi to adopt his brilliance while obscuring the fact that the man who wrote the foundational textbook on Western tactical maneuvering was a North African commander, leading a coalition of African and Iberian troops.
Right, and it is crucial to clarify here that the dossier isn't claiming the terms Phoenician or Punic are historically inaccurate. Carthage was founded by Phoenician settlers originally.
Right, from the Levant.
Yes. The argument is about emphasis and context. By hyper-focusing on his distant Levantine ancestry, institutional histories conveniently bypass the reality that by the 3rd century BCE, Carthage was a deeply integrated North African empire.
They had been there for centuries.
Over 500 years. Framing him as vaguely Mediterranean sanitizes the narrative. It allows the Western military tradition to claim his legacy without having to intellectually center a North African civilization as a peer competitor to Rome.
It's an argument about how we curate the past to serve the present. It really is. But the dossier also points out that the erasure was never total.
No, you can't erase everything.
Despite the fires of 146 BCE, you cannot completely wipe a civilization of that magnitude from the earth. The physical remnants of Punic Carthage survive. Today, in modern Tunisia, you can literally visit the UNESCO World Heritage Site. You can look at the massive circular naval ports, the Kothon, where hundreds of warships were docked. You can see the Tophet Sanctuary and the Byrsa Hill.
And beyond the archaeology, there is a vigorous movement in modern North African scholarship actively reclaiming this narrative space. Historians and archaeologists like Mohammed Hassan Fontar are doing the painstaking work of foregrounding the African dimension of Carthaginian identity.
Rebuilding the context.
Exactly. They are digging through the physical and textual ashes to remind the global community that Carthage was not just a preamble to the Roman Empire. It was a complex, vibrant epicenter of power in its own right.
So, bringing all of this together for you, the listener, we've traversed an incredible landscape today. We've broken down the cellular logistics that kept tens of thousands of men alive in the freezing passes of the Alps. We've analyzed how Hannibal hacked the Roman command structure at Trasimene by blinding their communication network, and how he utilized the lethal physics of compression to orchestrate the slaughter at Cannae.
A masterclass in tactical warfare.
But we've also seen how tactical perfection can be completely undone by the slow, agonizing grind of strategic attrition and diplomatic failure.
The limits of military genius. And on top of that, we've explored a compelling critique of how history itself is manufactured.
Right.
We've examined the argument that a civilization's memory can be subtly whitewashed by the very institutions that revere its military genius, highlighting the danger of accepting a historical narrative simply because it is neatly packaged in a textbook.
Which leaves us with a truly haunting counterfactual to end on. I want you to imagine a world where the Roman fires of 146 BCE never happened. Imagine if we actually possessed Hannibal's own memoirs.
That would change everything.
Imagine if the Punic military manuals detailing their exact doctrines, their political philosophies, and their logistical frameworks survived intact. If those African texts were sitting in the libraries of West Point and Sandhurst today, how fundamentally different would our understanding of strategy and leadership be?
Would we view warfare differently?
Would we still idolize the bloody trap of Cannae? Or would we learn entirely different lessons from the man who terrified the greatest empire of the ancient world? It's a reminder to relentlessly question the narratives you are handed. Look for the epistemic voids, look for the blind spots, and never stop digging for the structures hiding beneath the surface.